There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes. What was going on?
Okay, I'm going to start actually at Christmas in 2019, and I'll speed up quite quickly then to June 2020. So Christmas 2019, I had a dreadful flu. So dreadful that my mother kicked me out of the house on Christmas Day and told me to return to my own house with my Christmas dinner in a lunchbox, which just wouldn't be like my mother. So off I went, absolutely dying with this dreadful flu. I recovered from that, and in February, March, we heard about COVID. Then my mother said, I think you had COVID at Christmas. But back then, there were no antigen tests or anything like that.
Were you still working as an
yes,
OT?
I was.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually, the HSC, our health service executive here, then said that anyone who is presenting with a cough, you will all remember, anyone who is presenting with a cough must have a negative antigen test before they return to work. So I was still coughing and needed a negative antigen. So in March, I did my antigen and had a negative antigen test. I had dreadful sinus problems after, in March, April. And actually, towards the end of March, I developed shingles along the trigeminal nerve. So, are you familiar with the trigeminal nerve?
I am now.
Yes. So the trigeminal nerve is a nerve that comes from the back of the brain all the way through the brain and has three branches. One that runs above your eyebrow, one that runs down along under your eye, and then the third branch runs across your hard palate in your mouth. It subdivides, and then along your jawline here and kind of can wrap itself around your lower teeth. The one along your hard palate can also innervate your tongue. So, and it has sensory and motor components. So, around at the end of May, beginning of June, I began to feel funny feelings in my face and along my tongue. It felt like I'd eaten a lot of chili. It was on and off, not very consistent. And then it started to feel like I had eaten a whole bag of popping candy. Do you remember that stuff? And then when I stuck my tongue out, it looked like it was dystonic, so trembling movements on my tongue. And along with that, I had developed a lump on my face again. So shingles had returned and had returned with vengeance. And during the re-emergence of the shingles, I had developed encephalitis. So encephalitis is an infection in the brain, and it's when I had autoimmune encephalitis. So that's when your immune system is so suppressed that it starts to attack healthy tissue in your brain and cause inflammation. So I approached some colleagues at the hospital, and they all told me I looked wicked. Thank you very much. And my manager said, you need to go home. So I drove home to Wexford from the National Rehabilitation Hospital. That's 100 kilometres drive. It was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and I prepared dinner, left it simmering on the hob, and I sat on my sofa with my pen in my hand to write a list of things to call my GP about and make an appointment. And I sat writing, and suddenly the pen dropped from my hand, my arm went up like this, and I had tremors. My face jerked and my head jerked, and I had tremors all down my face. I tried to call for help. I couldn't hear my own voice. In my head, I said a prayer. I then collapsed on my sofa, and I said in my mind, oh my God, I've had a seizure. I'm off the road. So that's all I was concerned about, that I was hanging up
Always
my car
the medical
keys.
professional.
Yes, I was
Wow.
hanging up my car keys because
Wow.
I was so used to saying this to my patients.
Of course.
Okay, I'm afraid you're 12 months off the road, whatever. We have to follow doctor's orders. So when my sister came home from work, she's a public health nurse, I come round and I called her and I said, you need to come round, I need an ambulance. And we called the ambulance and off I went to Wexford General Hospital, where I spent 6 days. There I had frequent seizures. A number of them were tonic-clonic seizures, so quite severe seizures. Those I don't recall, thankfully. I do recall the ladies in the beds across from me, who are all elderly and extremely traumatized, watching me having seizures. It's an extremely traumatic thing to witness, never mind to experience, and that is something that I'm ever grateful to COVID for. I was explaining to Professor Delargy earlier.
Explain that, please. Yes.
So, when I was admitted to hospital, COVID was in full swing. It was June 2020. So my family, my relatives were not permitted to visit me. So I spent 15 weeks in hospital as thankfully the wonderful team in Beaumont tried to stabilise me. I was then transferred to Beaumont Hospital here in Dublin to the epilepsy monitoring unit, and during that time was COVID. My family weren't allowed to visit, and seizure activity is an extremely, some of it can be very subtle. Okay, I can have a seizure right now and you would not know that I'm having a seizure. The focal seizures, absent seizures, and so on. Then I could have a tonic-clonic seizure or status epilepticus, where you need to call an ambulance, and if you don't, I could have very severe brain damage. And it's very obvious that I'm having a seizure. I know that if I feel like having a seizure right now, I can put my hand up and my colleagues over here know to help me. I'm fully alert when I have a complex partial seizure. That's the type of seizure that I have. And my family have found it extremely traumatic observing seizure activity. I was discharged home from Beaumont Hospital, very unstable with seizures. And also when I went to the National Rehabilitation Hospital in the dead of night, undercover, many of my colleagues didn't even know that I was there for 5 weeks having rehabilitation. Thank you to everybody for helping me with that. But I was high on steroids to try and help the encephalitis, the swelling on the brain, to be managed. And once those, sorry now my word finding, once those steroids had been withdrawn and titrated down, the seizure activity re-emerged. So I'm currently, unfortunately, not seizure-free. I have about 4 to 5 seizures per month, which is a huge improvement from 200 seizures in 24 hours.
Wow.
In my first in the first 24 hours in Beaumont Hospital. It took a full year for the team in Beaumont, in Oxford University, in Germany, and in London to discover exactly what caused the encephalitis. Was it the zoster virus, which is the shingles that emerged here on my trigeminal nerve, or was it something else?
Have you discovered what it is? What it was?
Not concretely,
Okay.
but they are treating it for the zoster virus. It looks most likely that it is zoster virus, and I am responding well to the treatment for zoster virus encephalitis.
Okay.
So every 12 weeks, I return to Beaumont Hospital for 5 days for IVIG, which is an immunosuppressant therapy. I receive that over the 5 days. It's titration into a vein for 4 hours, and I take 124 oral tablets per week. The majority of those are anti-epileptic drugs.
Okay.
Some of them are to help manage diabetes type 2, which unfortunately is a side effect of the high doses of steroids.
Yeah.
And I was predisposed to diabetes type 2 through a genetic link. And then some of that medication is just to boost my immune system.
So tell me this, your story is unbelievably compelling and you tell it really well. So just to say, well done. Kind of a round of applause, please, for Alison. You told that really, really well. And it's incredibly compelling and it's very traumatic and I can't imagine what it was like to go through. I'm going to jump you through because the problem in this room is, and the problem with the panelists is you know too much, right? So you're not just this patient on the end of a list. You know what's happening. You're very aware, and also your colleagues are dealing with you. But going in the dark of night back to the hospital you work in as a patient, I have to ask you, what was that like?
That was one of the top 3 most traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
So the top 3 traumatic experiences were speaking to my parents on the phone when I was eventually able to speak, because my speech center is the part of my brain that took the biggest knock from all of the inflammation. And all I can say is that the first sound I made sounded like a primal scream. Yes, it sounded like a primal scream.
Okay, yeah. And then going back to the hospital, yeah.
The second most traumatic experience was when my right arm was paralyzed from the seizure activity, and nobody showed me or could tell me why this was happening or how to help it to recover. But suddenly my OT brain kicked in. And I said, oh my God, Ali, wake up. You can do this. So start your sensory rehabilitation, your desensitization program, your proprioceptive rehabilitation program.
You got this, girl.
I got this. And I got it to work again.
Good for you.
And my arm is working again.
Good for you.
But I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
Yes, dexterity is perfect, but proprioceptive wise, it still feels sometimes a bit funny. So when I have my right hand resting over my left hand and my eyes are closed, I'm never sure really whether my right hand is under or over my left hand. Okay, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the third most traumatic experience was when I sat on the bed in room 7 in the Willow unit, and Janet came in to admit me.
Oh.
And she put the name tag on my arm.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really hard. It's hard, but you also know a lot. So you are an oracle now of all of this information. So in at the end of the day, you've got a lot of information to share.